from the first time we connected on a Zoom meeting. I knew this was going to be an awesome experience.
Thanks. So, Oakland, let's take it back. Take it back. Can you tell us a little bit about who you are? I know I just gave an amazing introduction, but you started as a child. So, yeah, can you take us back to where it all started for you?
Yeah, so I grew up in a small little farm town in northern Illinois, and a family of six. My mom and dad, four brothers, three brothers, and me, four kids, and really it started there. I was the oldest of the four kids, and lots of times, once my mom and dad both were working, lots of times I was kind of put in charge of my siblings, and so leadership started there. But I grew up in that small little farm town, worked on farms all my life until I went into the Army, played baseball, basketball, football in high school, and then went off to college and had some leadership positions in college. And then I got commissioned into the Army and spent 23 years there. Retired from the Army and ran a food bank for a couple of years. And then did some recruiting as a Department of the Army civilian. And now I'm out talking about leadership and success as often as I can. It really is my passion.
Awesome. And so where were you born?
I was born in Tennessee, but I grew up in northern Illinois.
Northern Illinois. And so you said you said it was like a farm?
So it was a town of 1,200 people, but it was surrounded by farmland. If you know anything about northern Illinois, it's corn capital of the world. I mean, acres and acres and acres of corn and cattle and stuff like that. So I started working on a farm when I was 12 years old, baling hay for $1 an hour. And eventually, in the summer times, in between, in the summertime as I was growing up, eventually I became one of the oldest and one of the more experienced people working on the farm. And so the farmer put me in charge of all of the other workers. And so that was probably really my first leadership experience, probably starting about the time I was a sophomore, junior in high school.
And what did mom and dad do?
So my father was a factory worker for most of his life, and eventually bought a bar. So just to tell you what the habits of this town of 1,200 people was, there were 1,200 people, there were 3 bars in the town. So drinking was certainly one of those things that everybody did a lot of, and that's how they relaxed and all that. Nothing wrong with that. But then my mother also worked in a factory for many years, and then got into working in the banking industry. But my father never finished the 8th grade, and my mother never finished the 10th grade. So, but my father made it very clear to me as a little boy. I remember him telling me, he said, "Son, you are going to go to college." He said, "I'm not paying for it, but you're going to college, so figure that one out." And he was honest; he didn't pay for it, but he was adamant that I was going to be better than him, and he instilled that into me, that you can be anything you want in this country. And I think that's part of the reason I became an officer in the Army, is because I looked back on my life and I thought, coming from where I came from to getting where I was, nowhere else in the world does that happen, or very few places in the world does that happen. That you can come from there and be anything you want in the world. And I always told myself, I do these things that I'm doing so that my kids or somebody else's kids will have the same opportunities that I had growing up.
And wow, and now, so you're in this small town, 12 years old, you're working on the farm. How many siblings did you say you had again?
I had 3 brothers.
3 brothers. Older, younger?
All younger. I was the oldest.
Okay, wow. Okay, so older brother. Oldest in the family. Okay, you're 12 years old working in the farm. That experience, like you said, and the years that you did, and you were the one who started to lead, what did you learn about leadership just there? What did you see? I mean, you're 12 years old, so what was through Oakland's eyes, and maybe even certain things from your father. But yeah, let's say from those ages, what certain things did you maybe pick up on the farm, pick up at home, that maybe years later you reflect back on, that taught you a little bit about leadership, and what worked well and what didn't work so well?
Yeah. So I think one of the things I learned is self-discipline, that you have, people shouldn't have to come check on you, make sure you're doing the right thing. You do the right thing because it's the right thing to do, not because somebody's watching or somebody's going to check up. As a leader, they are watching and they are going to check up, but that's not why you do the right thing. And the people above you don't have time to check to make sure that you as a leader are doing the things you're supposed to do. That's on you to do those things. So I learned that, and I learned about taking care of people. You know, working out on a farm in the middle of the summer in northern Illinois, it's 9,500 degree, 50-60% humidity. It was hot, and every once in a while I had to remind the farmer, hey, we need a break. These, especially the younger, I remember when I was 12 and I started, I needed a break much more than the guy who was leading our crew, who was 18 years old. So I learned the importance of taking care of people and making sure people had what they needed, and I wasn't overworking them. And then, certainly there's things always that go wrong, and that you got to work through. And there was times when I asked people to do things that they didn't want to do, and I had to work through that. That's been throughout my career, and I think that's any leader. People look at successful leaders and they think that the path was like this. No, the path goes up and down, and you just got to work through those difficult times.
Wow. Okay. So really like taking care of people, when you take care of people, that has an effect. Okay. So you go through that, and then what age did you now go off into the military?
Yeah, so I graduated from high school at 18, and I graduated on the 6th of June, and then on the 29th of June, I reported to West Point. So that was really my introduction into the military. I did not graduate from the United States Military Academy at West Point, but I went there for 2 years. And then my father, who owned the bar, the tavern, was having some health issues. So I left West Point, came home, helped him run his bar for about 18 months. And then I finished up in ROTC at a local college there, about 12 miles away from us. And so I finished up ROTC, got my commission. So I came on active duty in 1986, was when I came on active duty.
And let's talk even a little bit about the bar, being a leader there. What was, your experience like there? How did you now take on that role and say, okay, cool, Dad's a bit sick now, I'm going to now run the bar?
Yeah, that was something completely alien to me that but I quickly, you got to make sure you order the stock. You got to make sure that, you open on time, you close on time, which was important. And that the people, other people who are working there are doing the right things. So I did manage two other people. They usually didn't work the same time I did, but I had to make sure that, their time and that they were there. And if they weren't there, to cover that. So yeah, that was interesting. And I think that had an impact on me as well in my leadership journey. Just knowing that I could do that, at the adult level, not just the high school and college level, but at the adult level, I could actually do that. And the people I was managing were much older than me, which was a good segue into my first job in the military.
So, and let's now talk about that. What was your first job in the military? Because I do want to get to that. How, leading people who are older than you, right? And I think that really now comes down to someone's ability to communicate, have vision, look after people, where it's like, even though you're younger than, they can still be able to, take heed or be able to follow what you're saying. So yeah, can you talk us to a little bit about your first job in the military, and then that dynamic also in the bar and in the military of now leading people who are older than you?
Right. So I think, my first job in the military, I was a platoon leader, an infantry platoon leader. And uh, I took over that platoon. My platoon was already in the field doing a training exercise. And so my company commander drove me out there, introduced me to my platoon sergeant, who was my second in command in the platoon. And I remember him like he was yesterday. Amazing man. Sergeant First Class Pinson. He was about 6'5", about 220 pounds, big old country boy from Mississippi. And immediately, we got introduced. He immediately grabbed me by the shoulder, said, "Sir, pick up an MRE. Let's go have lunch." And we went over and we sat underneath a tree, and we're sitting there eating lunch. And he said, look, sir. He said, "You're in charge. You're the boss. We will do things any way that you want to do them." He said, "However," and here I am, I'm a 23-year-old lieutenant. He said, "However, I've been in the Army for 23 years. He'd been in the Army as long as I'd been alive. Why would you not listen to somebody like that?" And he said to me, he said, "If you're going to mess up, I'm going to tell you. If you still want to do it that way, we'll do it that way." He said, "But I've got some more experience than you do. And so the only reason you wouldn't listen to somebody like that is because of your ego." And look, we all have an ego. Anybody who tells you they don't have an ego is lying to you. And we want people to have an ego, because that's what drives people to be successful. That's what drives them to be the best at whatever they're doing. But good leaders know when to put that ego aside, because I don't care how long you've been doing what you're doing. You don't have all the answers. You don't have all the skills, the knowledge, the abilities. Use those that your people have. Use those abilities, skills, and knowledge. And I give Sergeant First Class Pinson a lot of credit for having helped me develop into the leader that I am.
But like, how are you a lieutenant at such a young age?
So you go through Army, you go through either West Point or Army ROTC, and you go to college for 4 years. You take ROTC classes or military science classes. And when you graduate, you get commissioned to lieutenant.
Okay, wow. So that was a very powerful talk, being able to now, have that and say, look, we're here. We're here to follow what you have to say. And I think that was very powerful, moment just right there. So now
one of the things you said was absolutely true. It's about communication. It, in the beginning, every time, I'm brand new at this and he's been there for a long time, I would bounce everything off of him and get his opinion on it. I didn't always do what his opinion was. Sometimes that ended up well, sometimes that didn't end up well, and you learn lessons that way. But I was all that open communication. If I was screwing up, I wanted him to tell me that. If I was going to mess up, I wanted him to tell me. And again, you got to put your ego aside, that you're going to make mistakes, and the people you lead know you're going to make mistakes. That's okay. The key to that is when you do make a mistake, you own up to it.
So talk to us a little bit about, let's say practical situations for leaders when maybe the team is underperforming. Now, sometimes, for example, I'll be in a position where if I see that within my team and in my business, I'm always thinking, okay, is it me? Is it the training I'm doing? Have I not been the best, communicator, or have I not tried to make things clear, even though I really try to do? So what line is there for a leader now who's going through that issue? How do they look? Okay, is it me, or now is it just maybe the team member? And then how do they now navigate that from, if they do have to let that person go, or improving that person's performance?
Yeah, and I've had to deal with that throughout my career. And this is the way I've always looked at it. First of all, you're the leader. So if that person's underperforming, it is your responsibility. You may not be the cause of it, but it's your responsibility to either fix it or remove that person from the team if they're causing problems for the team. So the first thing is, and I see this all the time. I'll go into a company and some CEO will be talking about a leader and they say, well, they just can't, they're just not meeting the standard. And the first thing I ask them is, so show me where you trained them to the standard that you're asking them to meet. And they say, well, I didn't. He was on his resume that he could do it, and I just assumed that he could do it. And I said, how'd that work out for you? That assumption. It's insane to hold people to a standard that you don't know they can meet. So I was always adamant, we are going to meet standards. Here's the standard, and we're going to meet it. And I would put them through that training so that I knew they could meet the standard that I'm asking them to meet. So when I had somebody who wasn't meeting the standard on a regular basis, I'd call them in my office and I'd say, okay, here's the standard. Here's where you are. And here's, I think, the difference between a leader and a boss. A boss walks up to you and says, you're not meeting the standard, fix it. And then they walk away. Well, if you knew how to meet the standard, you probably would be meeting the standard. So that's a horrible way to handle that. I would say, here's the standard, here's where you are. Now let's figure out, you and me, let's figure out a plan to get you to that standard. And then we'd sit down and we'd write out a plan. Okay, we got to do this, we got to do that, we got to make sure you can do this correctly. And then every week or every month, depending on how long that training process that you came up with him or her, then you call them back into your office on a regular basis and say, okay, we've met this standard now. Let's work on the next one. And you just go down that list. And this is my philosophy, because I get asked all the time, when do you cut sling? When do you make that determination that you got to let somebody go? And I always tell them, if you go through that process, at the end of that process, if they're still not meeting the standard, then they have self-selected not to work for you anymore, because you have given them every opportunity to show you that they can do what you're asking them to do. And if they don't meet it at that point, that's probably a good time to let them go, and don't waste any more time, resources, and effort on that person.
And with deadlines and how busy CEOs are, and the pressures around the business, how long should that process take? How long do you go through that? Okay, are we meeting the standard? Type of process before it's like, because like you said, time, resources, and like
Right.
for me, in what we like to do, I tell my team all the time, like, I want you guys to be A players. I want you guys to come and bring ideas. I want you to come and say, hey, let's do this, let's do this. Like, I want you always innovating and improving. But just what you're saying there, how long now should you now go through that process, as let's say for the CEOs watching?
I think that depends on what type of position that person that's not meeting the standard is in. If they're in a position where they're costing you money on a regular basis, then I think that in the business world, certainly, then that process has got to be shorter than if they're not in that type of position. But I think that's the leader has to figure that out. How first of all, is the person worth trying to save? Because they may not be.
Good question.
But if they are, then you got to figure out, okay, how much effort am I and other leaders over that person going to take to make that person meet the standard? And that's got to be a case by case basis, I think.
Okay. Wow. And now, like, onto this topic of leadership. Okay, so now you're lieutenant. How long were you lieutenant for?
5 years.
5 years. So,
Yeah.
you did 5 years there, and you're leading people older than you. Okay, so what are some of the lessons and some stories now, kind of going through that journey? And because I just want to go through that trajectory of your life and to where you are now, and the power of information that you're giving to people. So yeah, now talk to us a little bit about that 5 years and then transitioning on to the next phase that you entered into.
Yeah. So my first platoon that I had with that great platoon sergeant was very successful. We were at the top of all the platoons in the brigade, probably the division, in all the standards that they measured us by. But there was another platoon in our company that was not meeting the standard. It was not performing very well. And my company commander one day was griping and complaining about that platoon. And I said, sir, there's nothing wrong with that platoon. I said, there's something wrong with the leadership in that platoon. I said, I promise you, if you put me in charge of that platoon tomorrow, I will fix that platoon. And be careful what you ask for, because he said, done. And so I had to take over this platoon that was not performing well. And so I had to come up with a way to fix it. And so I went through the same process. I said, okay, here's the standard. I'd pick a thing that we had to do. And I say, here's the standard. That this is what we're going to meet today. Because I wanted to make sure they could do the things that they should be able to do. So I said, here's the standard. And today, this is what we're going to meet. And if we meet that at 3:00 this afternoon, then we're done. If we don't meet that standard 10:00 tonight, we're here till 10:00 tonight. We are going to meet this standard. And I did that for all the things that I knew that we had to be able to do. And then once I did that, then when I came up with training plans and missions that I wanted to put them through, I started with very simple ones, made sure they could do that, build their confidence. Okay, we did great on that. So let's step it up. Let's do a little bit harder thing and a little bit harder thing. And by the time I left that platoon, I think it was 8 months later, and moved on to my next platoon, they were doing fine. They were doing just as good as any other platoon in the brigade.
Wow. So you really had the kind of foresight and vision to be able to, okay, this is what needs to happen. This is how we fix it. And then let's get there.
Yeah. Well, but you start simple. I tell people that all the time. When you're trying to fix something so that you can build that momentum, build that confidence, start simple. Because if the first thing you give them, they can't do, then you've destroyed their confidence. And now you got to start all over again. So start slow, start with very simple things, and then build on that momentum.
Build on, and which also, like you said, it increases their confidence. Wow. Okay. So now, how did you now get into writing your first book, and through that now experience of what you went through, being a lieutenant?
Yeah, well, I didn't write my book till I was out of the Army. So,
Yeah.
but I always knew I wanted to write that book, because I look at it as I believe every leader, it's your responsibility to pass on some of these lessons that you learn to that next generation of leaders, because that is your job, is to create that next generation of leaders, because you are going to leave your position as a leader one way or another. You're either going to get promoted, you're going to get fired, you're going to decide to move to another company, or you're going to die. One way or the other, you are going to leave that position. So you got to be preparing that next generation. And I just kept pushing it off. And I never really got to it until one day, my wife and I, we live in a condo here in Florida, and her mom, who lived in the same condo, and two friends who live in the condo, we went to an event at our Catholic church that was kind of a motivational / how do we revitalize the Catholic Church. And it was a 3-hour long event. And the keynote speaker, he spoke 3 different times for like 40, 45 minutes each. And then we'd take a break, and then he'd come back and talk. And every time he took a break, I went up and talked to him, because he was doing what I wanted to do. He was out talking to people, helping people, motivating people. And so he was passing on some good information, things I still use today. And then at the end, I went up and I said, I thanked him for his time, and we said our goodbyes, and he started to walk away. And then he turned around, took about 2 steps, and he turned around and he said, "Oh, have you written a book?" And I said, "No, but I'm thinking about it." And he said, "Stop thinking about it and write it." And so I went home that night. That was the 15th of February, 2020. Went home that night, wrote out the table of contents, started writing it the next day, and I published it on the 12th of February, 2021.
Wow.
So just under a year.
Wow. That, like, execution, you had that seed. You said something that you saw that's what you wanted to do. Now, you talked about leaving that legacy and leaving that inspiration to the next generation, but was there something like, I want to be a keynote speaker? Because I want to talk about that. How did now that to become like, okay, being a professional keynote speaker, did that vision, is that something that you said, okay, wow, okay, I know I'm leaving a legacy, I want to impart this information, but that doesn't always relate to being a keynote speaker. So what made you say, I want that?
Yeah. So, throughout my career, I was involved in leadership development programs, helping teach, coach, train, mentor junior leaders. That's part of an Army officer's job. And so I was doing that my entire career. So I knew that building that next generation was really the legacy that I wanted to leave. And in the Army, that was what I was doing. Then I did some recruiting for Army ROTC as a Department of the Army civilian when I was a civilian, and I was doing kind of the same thing. And then I thought, as I was getting ready to retire from that job, so how do I influence that next generation? And I came up with, okay, I got 4 ways to do that. I've got my book, I've got keynote talks and running leadership development programs for companies. I've got my social media where I can write articles, blogs, write comments on other people's articles about leadership, kind of get my view out there. And then the last piece was podcasts. And so I just try to use all 4 of those as much as I can. But my passion is really keynote speaking, because when you're out there talking, and I've been a speaker for over 30 years, just never got paid for it, because except for what the Army paid me for it. Because as an officer, they always want you to come talk at Veterans Day or Memorial Day or 4th of July or whatever. And I always did, because I loved it. And I never minded doing that. But then once I published my book, then I actually had people who offered to pay me to come speak. But it really is my passion, because when you are doing that, you get that direct contact with the audience. And nothing better than to see the light go off in somebody's mind. When you say something, you can see that you have had an impact on them, that they finally understand something that they didn't quite understand before. And to me, that is just such a great feeling.
It's a powerful feeling, to be able to, again, leaving that imprint on people. And even for me, being keynote speaker as well, like it's that feeling and just being in that present moment and being in flow and seeing people have a reaction. And then even some situation where I've seen people take action on those things that I talked about. That's what,
Absolutely.
impact.
And one of my favorite parts about speaking at events is the question and answer period. I love that, because then you actually get to help that person. And here's the thing I always tell people, because a lot of times people will come up to me after my talk, after the question and answer period, one-on-one, and ask a question. I said, why didn't you ask that question during question and answer period? I said, because I promise you, you're not the only person who had that question. And now I'm only helping you when I could have helped 10 people. And I don't mind that. I mean, I love when they come up one-on-one after. When I go to an event, I spend the entire day there. I don't just come talk and leave. I want to be out there where people can come up and talk to me and engage with me and ask me questions and bounce ideas off of me. But when you do that, you cheat other people out of that same experience, because I promise you there's other people with the same question.
Wow. Yeah. And, to be able to, like you say, hey, other people are going through this. And that's why I think it's so powerful when, you're speaking one to many. It's quite powerful. Do you think it's imperative to write a book when someone wants to become a keynote speaker, someone like yourself?
I get asked that a lot, because I get on LinkedIn, which is the main social media I'm on. I get at, people who are aspiring to be a keynote speaker or just starting out. And they ask me, is it mandatory that I write a book? And I said, no, it's probably not mandatory. There's keynote speakers out there that don't have a book. I said, but it does give you credibility, whether that's right or wrong. It does give you credibility if you've written a book. And some of the proposals I send in, one of the first questions on their form is, are you a published author? So obviously that matters to people. So I think, here's what I tell people. If you think you have a book in you, then just like that guy gave me permission, then write it. It it doesn't hurt anything to have it out there. In fact, it's great that you took the time and effort to put your thoughts, your ideas, your beliefs into writing for other people to look at. But I, I don't think it's mandatory, but I think it certainly does help you as a keynote speaker to have a book.
And what was that process that you went through writing that book?
So it was funny, you think, at least I did, I'm a very disciplined, very self-disciplined person. And I thought, okay, I'm going to set aside 2 hours every day, 3 hours or whatever it was. And then, whatever time that was, I had it on my calendar and I'd sit down and I'd like, yeah, not coming to me. So I think that most people, there's some people that can do that probably, much more creative than me, that might be able to do that. But for me, it eventually just came to when I had the feeling, when I had the idea, when something would pop in my mind. And one of the processes that I used and I pass on to people who are talking about writing a book is I took my table of contents and I put a folder for each chapter. And in that folder, I put a blank Word document. And when I would come up with an idea or a thought, I would go to that folder, pull up that document, and I'd write something, maybe only a sentence or a paragraph. But just so I had it, I don't forget it. Because I don't know how many times I was laying in bed at night and something would pop in my mind. And I think, well, I'll write that down tomorrow. Yeah, right. That's gone tomorrow morning. So that's when I came up with that idea. And, at 2 o'clock in the morning, I'd get up and I'd walk in here to my office and I'd write a sentence or two and then I'd go back to bed. But the next morning, then that would jog my memory of what I was thinking about. And then I could expand that a little bit. And that helped me a lot.
Getting that down.
And the other thing I tell people is that you don't have to go in the order of the chapters. I wrote my first chapter very last. That was the last chapter I wrote.
Wow. It was the last one, was it?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So incredible, powerful lessons you've broken down here. What are some of and you may have referenced it a little bit earlier. What are some of the slight mistakes that you see CEOs going in when you're going in to do workshops, when you're going into keynote speaking, even certain questions that you get asked? What do you think a lot of people are getting wrong today when it comes to, leading a team, leading that vision and a mission?
Right. I talk about servant leadership. That's the style of leadership that I think is the best leadership. And in that, and I see this a lot, I believe that leadership is about selfless service. It is not about you. And yet it's all about you. It's not about you and the title you're going to get or the privileges you're going to get or that you're going to get better pay. Those things come with being a leader, and that's great as long as that's not the only reason you want to be the leader. If that's the only reason you want to be the leader, then please go do something else because you're not going to be a very good one. And so what I'm seeing is that a lot of people don't take care because it's all about you and how you empower the people in the organization that you have the privilege to lead. And it is a privilege to be the leader. And I think too many leaders today have forgotten that as well. Just look around. So I think that's one of the things that I think I'm seeing. I'm not seeing that selfless service. They don't believe that that's why they're there. I got it. You got to make money. In the Army, we had this saying, mission first, people always. You got to accomplish the mission. And if you're in a business, then you got to make money. I got that. But that doesn't mean that these two are not mutually exclusive. You can still do what you need to do and take care of the people that you have the privilege to lead. And taking care of them doesn't mean you let them do whatever they want. It means sometimes being a servant leader, taking care of people means you're going to make them do things they don't want to do because it's in their best interest. They may not know it's in their best interest at that point, but it is. And I've had soldiers come up to me after, after we deployed somewhere, the first Gulf War or Kosovo or whatever, where they didn't agree with something that I was making them do. But after the deployment, they'd say, sir, I'm glad you made us do that because I had to do that there and I knew I could do it.
Having that foresight and vision to be able to be like, you may not know this is best for you, but it's also why I'm here to be able to guide you there. And so what do you look at people like Elon Musk, Donald Trump, all these big leaders, what do they do well?
I think that's a great question. I think number one, they know how to delegate. You cannot do everything yourself. Leaders who try to do everything themselves either fail or burn themselves out. You can't do everything yourself. So you got to figure out only the things that you as the leader have to do, and you delegate everything else. So I think they do that. I think they also, good leaders, in my opinion, around the world that I've seen in every profession, take ownership of that organization. They realize that they can give out authority, and you should, because that's where creativity happens. You've got to give the authority to make something happen. If you give somebody a project, then you got to give them the authority to make it happen. If you don't, then they're just going to come back to you every 5 minutes and ask you, can I do this or should I do that? Give them the authority to make decisions, to do things in your name. You can delegate authority. You cannot delegate responsibility as a leader. And I see that mistake a lot in this world right now, where leaders don't want to take responsibility. They say, yeah, that went well, I'm going to take responsibility for that. That didn't go so well, I'm going to blame John for that. That's not leadership. Your name is the name on the blame line all the time. My philosophy was always this, and I always did this. If my team accomplished what it was supposed to, I went to my boss and I tried to do it in front of my team. And I said, hey, boss, look what my guys and gals did. And oh, by the way, John, Jim, and Jane did a great job on this project. If we didn't accomplish what we were supposed to, I went in front to my boss, tried to do it in front of my people. And I say, hey, boss, I messed up. And this is how we're going to fix it. Because in the end, whether I messed it up or not, I'm the leader. I'm responsible for it. I should have made sure that it didn't get messed up. But then this is how we fix it. And that's always been my philosophy, because we're all going to make mistakes. We're all going to mess things up. Nobody in this world is perfect. I keep trying to convince my wife I am, but she's not buying it. You'd think after 38 years I could convince her, but no, I can't. None of us are perfect. We're all going to make mistakes. I don't care if you made a mistake. What I care about, what did you do after you made the mistake? Did you try to hide it? Did you try to blame it on somebody else? Or do you walk up to me and own it and tell me how we're going to fix it? Then let's go fix it. That doesn't mean that you got to learn from that mistake. And there may be accountability for that mistake, which is another thing I don't see a whole lot of in this world. We've turned responsibility and accountability into dirty words in this society today, and we got to get away from that. There should be accountability if you messed up. It doesn't mean it's career ending. It doesn't mean it's like, you're done, but there should be accountability, because that's how we learn. So we learn from it and we fix it and we move on. That's the philosophy you have to have when there's mistakes.
I really love that notion of accountability there. And we talked about it in our call earlier, where we live in a generation that is a little bit softer now, especially even in masculinity and being able to, raise up, fine and strong young men. And, there's a lot of sensitivity that's happening. Like we talked about in baseball, they don't keep score of the track, where it's like, oh, kids just no score, like, where it's like growing up, that competitiveness and the anger, the passion to go in and to be that authority figure. And so, as I said, on the masculine and femininity side, I believe we're losing a lot of core essences there in a softer society. So what's the cure to that? How do we continue to raise masculine men to lead the vision, and also feminine queens out there to also lead in their authority
Yeah.
and divinity.
Oh, absolutely. We need leaders in both, but they are different. But always go back to, I think we don't put an emphasis on a winning culture, getting results. And, in the real world, results do matter. In fantasy land, maybe they don't, where everybody's a winner and everybody gets a trophy, and that is fantasy land. In the real world, results matter. And growing up, my father I almost literally beat that into me, that results do matter, son. He used to tell me, he had this thing called the 75% rule when I was growing up, and I lived by it. I taught it to my kids, and I teaching it to my grandkids. He said, you should want to be better than 75% of the people doing whatever it is you are doing. He said, and if you're not, then you need to do one of two things: figure out how to get better at it, or go do something else, because obviously it doesn't matter to you. Now, when you start, are you going to be better than 75% of the people? Probably not, unless you're just some gifted person at that, whatever it is you're doing. But that's when you sit down and you figure out how to get better at it. And every day you get a little bit better and a little bit better, and eventually you're to that point. But we got to revitalize that winning attitude, that desire to win. And we got to teach people how to lose, because we're not going to win every time. I got that. But the desire to win every time you do something should be there. And I am about as competitive as there is. I mean, I don't care if I'm playing old maid with my 11-year-old granddaughter. I want to win. I want to win everything I do. And I think that attitude, we got to revitalize that attitude, revigorize that attitude in our youth. And I think that's part of the problem in this world today, is that there's no incentive. If I get a trophy, no matter what's the incentive to be the best? I think we got to get back to that.
Yeah, very, very powerful stuff, and it's so true. Real quick, a quick question I wanted to ask you, like, for the CEOs and the business leaders here. Can you talk to us a little bit, even a client relationship? When you're serving a client, you have people who are paying you, and you're there. What about when things maybe are not going so well, right? When how's leadership also leading the clients, leading the people who pay you, right? Sometimes maybe, they're paying me, so it's like, but like, how do you also lead your clients?
Yeah, I think that part of that goes into the trust piece. If they trust you, then they're willing to listen to you, even if they're the ones paying you. Then there has to be that trust piece of it, and especially in leadership. Without trust, the leader-led relationship cannot happen. It just doesn't. Somebody may do something because you tell them to do it, because you're the boss and you could fire them, but they're not following you. They're just doing what they have to do to keep their job. And I think that's the difference between a leader and a boss. But I think the trust piece, when I talk about trust, I talk about 360-degree trust. And I think that comes into what we're talking about here. Because I think everybody would agree that the first piece of trust is that the people you are leading have to trust you as the leader. And if that one's not there, we can all just go home, because it doesn't matter. Nothing else really matters at that point. But just as important, the leader has to trust the people that they're leading, that they're going to live within the culture. They're going to make good decisions. They're going to give me 100%. They're going to try to do the right thing. They're going to try to accomplish whatever it is I've asked them to do. And then everybody on that team has to trust everybody else on that team that they're going to do those same things. That when we're as a group, we're trying to accomplish something, that John's going to pull his weight and do the things that he needs to do that. But then we go to the outside the organization trust. That client that you have, either that you're providing a service for, or they're providing a service for you, that trust has to be there as well. Because nobody's going to do business with you if they don't trust you. And I hope you're not doing business with somebody you don't trust. So that 360-degree circle of trust, and if any piece of that is missing, then you got problems.
And so how do you build that trust? Because I think it's so powerful what you're saying, because even if, let's say, a project is not going so well, you're taking a bit longer to do it. They could not even, okay, but when you have that trust there, like you said, they're willing to, like, okay, we know maybe it hasn't been quicker as usual, or the service hasn't maybe been the best this month, but because we trust this person, even that lifetime value is, and this is what you're saying here is so valuable. This is why people book you as a speaker, because that is very, very important. It increases your lifetime value of a customer, which it keeps your business longer if you now get people to trust you. So now the question is, how do you, of course, for them to pay you and to get into business, there has to be some sort of trust there. But how do you now work on that trust? How does one build on that trust? As a CEO, you're getting busier, right? You're taking on more clients and you have more projects that you got to go to. So sometimes that attention that you had maybe wasn't there from the start. So now how does one, as one's getting busier and elevating and leading, build that trust with the client?
Yeah, I think, first of all, it's about that personal relationship, one-on-one with you and the client. Because again, human nature is we don't trust people we don't know, and that's probably a good thing. But you got to build that relationship with people, so that they know who you are and what you stand for and what you believe in, and that all goes back to your values. And I think that you have to display what it is you believe in, and you got to stick to those. The first time that you stray from your values, that usually ends up very poorly for you. And the more you do it, the more poorly it's going to end up. So I think you got to build that relationship. Then you got to be very transparent with them. Again, if you made a mistake, admit it. Tell them you made a mistake. Have that open communication where, honest communication. Communication without honesty doesn't mean anything. I can sit here and tell you, you're going to be this superstar. But if you're not going to be, then why am I doing, that erodes some of that trust, because you don't ever get to that point. So open, honest communication, admit when you made a mistake, and also be honest with them. If they're going to make, like Sergeant First Class Benson was with me, and tell them when they're about to make a mistake. In the end, it's their choice. They can either take your advice or not. But the more times you give them advice and it works, the more they're going to trust you. The more time you give them advice and they don't take it and it doesn't work, they're going to trust you more. Going back to Sergeant First Class Benson, for the first few months, I bounced everything off of him. And then one day I thought, okay, I got this. I'm going to make this decision on my own. And I decided I was going to do something. And I walked into his office and I said, hey, Sergeant Benson, this is what I'm going to do. And he looked at me and he said, really? And I thought, well, maybe not, because he was honest with me. And I'll tell you that's the key to trust is transparent, honest communication.
Transparent, honest communication. I love this so much. Just before we get out of here, I'm obviously very curious, so I'll keep asking you questions. You talked about 38 years of marriage. Now, everything you've been saying also now goes into the relationship. Now, how does one, I'm also in a phase where I'm, looking to get married next year. So I have my fiance. What's advice you would give to me to, have an amazing relationship?
Yeah, I get this a lot too, especially when I was working with 18, 19, 20-year-old young men and women in Army ROTC. They were getting ready to get married, and they'd always come in and ask me, my advice. And I always told them a couple of things. I said, number one, always be careful what you say, how you say what you say. You got to be honest, but there is a way to do it where you're not going to hurt somebody's feeling, because if it or make them feel bad about what it is they're about to do. You got to be honest with them, but be careful what you say, because once you say it, it cannot be unsaid. That they will remember that for the rest of their life. So
sorry, just like a quick example, maybe, your lady might say, "Hey, do I look good in this dress?" Or and then what?
Yeah.
No, but do you, what?
Well, what I would say is it looks okay. You've got better looking dresses than that. You look better in other dresses, or maybe green isn't your best color, something like that. But be honest. If you don't think it looks good on her, you got to be honest. But you can do it in a way that no, that makes you look fat. You're done. End of story. Yeah, I mean, you just got to be smart about how you communicate. And then the other piece is, look, leadership starts at home. But that just because you're the man in the thing doesn't mean you're the leader all the time.
Mm.
You know, again, if you're trying to do everything yourself, you're going to fail. I promise you. So, divide up, again, use other people's knowledge, skills, abilities, talents. There's things that my wife that I take her advice on because that's her area of expertise. There's things that I'm the leader on and I make the decisions. But we sit down, you got to sit down and say, okay, how are we going to divide this up so that it makes sense and then we're both not being burnt out. And especially in today's world where both people are probably working, you really got to do that, So be honest with people, be careful what you say, how you say it, and then figure out what that marriage is going to look like. Actually, before you get married, sit down and say, okay, what do we want this to look like going forward? And that will change, obviously, as you move on. I mean, how we divided things up before we had kids changed after we had kids. How we divided things up when we were both working changed when she was a stay-at-home mom. I mean, so that's something you got to revisit every so often as things in your life change.
Wow, powerful information. And how many grandchildren do you have?
I've got three grandchildren. I've got an 11-year-old granddaughter, 8-year-old grandson, and a 4-year-old grandson.
Wow, wow, what a blessing. What message do you want to leave them as you go on with your vision, and what will your legacy be?
Yeah, so I try to instill that winning attitude in them, and then the number one message that I try to instill in them, and I actually got to do it a couple years ago. My granddaughter, she was I think 9 at that point. She was trying to figure out whether or not she wanted to get involved in a project, and she said, "Well, I'm just not sure I could do it." And I used the old famous Henry Ford quote on her. I said, if you think you can, or if you think you can't, you're right. If you think you can, you got a shot. And that's the way you need to always approach something. If I'm going to do this, I got to have that mindset. I can succeed at this. You may not. I mean, that's called life. But at least you went into it with the right mindset. And at some point, you might have to say, yeah, I can't do that. I could go into the mindset that I'm going to be a pro basketball player at 63 years old. All I want, that's not going to happen. I mean, you got to be honest with yourself. Again, everything about yourself, if you're not honest, you're cheating yourself and you're lying to yourself. And nothing good comes out of that.
Powerful, powerful. So, just before we get out of here, what's next for you? And obviously being an international keynote speaker, also us having a speaker agency, I think this was a great way, for us to also get your story out to more people, for the event managers and people who are looking for this type of conversation. The reason why I love this conversation because it's relatable, getting your story and just having a conversation, right? It starts from everything. And for the people here who want to book you as a speaker, that is available. What is your vision? What do you see, yourself doing the next decade?
Yeah, until I can't do it anymore, physically can't do it, I don't see anything else than doing keynote talks and leadership development. And I am working on my second book. But that's really what I want to do. It is my passion. I believe it is my responsibility. It's all of anybody who's a leader, it's a responsibility to pass on these lessons. and I don't talk about leadership theory. I don't even mention theory in my book or in my talk. That's not what it's about. It's about everyday things that every leader can do to improve their leadership skills and abilities while empowering the people and the organization that they have to make them better. And I think that's part of a leader's job as well, is to make not only better at work, but better people of the people you lead, if they are willing to do that. And and so I really love what I do, passing on these to the next generation, and it is my passion. And I don't see myself doing anything else other than that.
And when you live with passion and purpose, it makes you feel and look younger, right? It has that burn and the desire to, keep going. Like I say, I know what I'm doing here. Like I'll be doing this until I die. Like there's no such thing as retirement. There's no such thing.
No,
You retire when you die.
yeah,
You're
yeah.
always
You,
on that, you know.
I love to fish. I live here in Florida, and I love to fish. I have my yacht, my little 17-foot John boat, and I go back in the mangroves and I fish. And my fishing buddy, who is retired, he's 83 years old, and he's fully retired. And he said to me, he said, "Oh, what are you doing?" He said, "Why are you flying all over the world talking?" He said, "Why don't you just retire and fish every day?" And I said, "I can't." I said, I, I look at it as my responsibility to do this, and I love what I do. And I if I ever retire completely, I'm not sure that I would live very much longer. I mean,
Mm.
that's just not me. I've got to be doing something, and because this is my passion, it's the perfect path for me.
It's so true, and I really love that. It gave me goosebumps. Really, it's so true. Like it's just in me, and yeah, I love it. I love it. Thank you, Oakland, so much for your time. I think I knew it would be an amazing conversation, but to have it, and again, when I come out to America, I'll hopefully even come and do another one in person and see you
I would
also.
love that. Yeah, absolutely.
I think that'd be maybe we'll do it on the yacht. We do it on the boat, right?
There you
Podcast.
go. Yeah.
Fishing. Oh, a live fishing one talking about leadership. I don't think anyone's come up with that idea. Ooh,
Yeah.
may have to, that's actually a good idea. We can do leadership lessons on while
Get
fishing
both my passions, leadership and fishing at the same time.
and fishing. Okay, yeah, love it. Thank you so much, Oakland. And I will get the details for the book. We'll put it in the description so people can go in and purchase it straight away. And yeah, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. This has been a great conversation, and it really was a conversation. I mean, I didn't know where it was going, and that's okay. That's the way it should be.
And time just goes like this, just
Yeah.
flies. So cool. Thanks, and we'll see you guys on the next show. Thanks, everyone. Oh, done. Hey, Oakland. Oh, I got to end. I got to stop it. I think it's still.